Chapter 4, Meeting in Session. 8. Meeting, Session, Recess, Adjournment. Explanation of terms. In an assembly, as mentioned above in 1.3, each event of the members being assembled to transact business constitutes a separate meeting, but the complete unit of engagement in proceedings by the assembly is a session, which, in the general case covering all types of assemblies, consists of one or more connected meetings. The term session is a fundamental concept entering into many important parliamentary rules. In parliamentary law, and as understood in this book, the terms defined below have distinct meanings. 1. A meeting of an assembly is a single official gathering of its members in one room or area to transact business for a length of time during which there is no cessation of proceedings and the members do not separate unless for a short recess as defined below. For modification of the one room or area requirement when the bylaws authorize electronic meetings, see 930 through 36. Depending on the business to be transacted, a meeting may last from a few minutes to several hours. 2. A session of an assembly, unless otherwise defined by the bylaws or governing rules of the particular organization or body, is a meeting of or series of connected meetings devoted to a single order of business, program, agenda, or announced purpose, in which, when there is more than one meeting, each succeeding meeting is scheduled with a view to continuing business at the point where it was left off at the previous meeting. See also discussion of the distinction between recess and adjournment, 8.7. 3. A recess, strictly speaking, is a short intermission or break within a meeting that does not end the meeting or destroy its continuity as a single gathering, and after which proceedings are immediately resumed at the point which they were interrupted. During the recess, members may leave the hall or room in which the meeting is being held, but they are expected to remain nearby. A recess frequently has a purpose connected with the business of a meeting itself, such as to count ballots, to permit consultation among members, or the like. For the motion to recess, see Chapter 20. 4. A meeting is said to stand at ease if the chair, without objection, simply permits a brief pause, without declaration of recess. In such a case, there is technically no interruption of the meeting, and members remain in their places. Quiet conversation among neighboring members may take place, but it must cease immediately when the chair declares the meeting stand again in order, or any member objects to continuing to stand at ease. 5. An adjournment, that is, the act of the assembly's adjournment, terminates a meeting. It may also end the session. If another meeting to continue the same business or order of business has been set for a definite time, or to be at the call of the chair, the adjournment does not end the session. See also 9:17 through 19 for use of the word adjournment as applied to an adjourned meeting. For the motion to adjourn, see Chapter 21. 6. The term adjournment sine die, I'm using the note here as a pronunciation guide, and the notes are written slightly strange. Sine die, or adjournment without day, usually refers to the close of a session of several meetings, A, where the adjournment dissolves the assembly, as in a series of mass meetings or an unusual or biennial convention for which the delegates are separately chosen for each convention, or B, where, unless called into special session, the body will not be convened again until a time prescribed by the bylaws or constitution, as in the case of a session of legislature. In cases where the words sine die are applicable, they may be, but are not always, mentioned in the motion to adjourn or the chair's declaration of the adjournment. Interrelation of the concepts. Number of meetings in a session. The length of a session or the number of meetings included within it varies depending on the type of assembly. In a permanent society whose bylaws provide for regular weekly, monthly, or quarterly meetings that go through an established order of business in a single afternoon or evening, each meeting of this kind normally completes a separate session, unless the assembly at such a meeting schedules an adjourned meeting, as explained in 9:17 through 19. This rule is the common parliamentary law and holds except where the bylaws provide otherwise. Although any society has the right to define in its bylaws what shall constitute a session of the organization, it is usually unwise in ordinary societies to adopt a rule making regular sessions last over a long period of time. Such a rule would make it possible for the hands of this organization to be tied up during that time, since the same question cannot be brought up again during the same session after it is too late to reconsider. Chapter 37. A vote that has finally disposed of a motion without adopting it. That is, a vote that has rejected or indefinitely postponed it or has sustained an objection to its consideration. See Chapters 11 and 26. In the case of a state or national organization that holds annual or biennial conventions, each convention constitutes a session of the organization, having one agenda or program, which may be broken up into separate meetings in the morning, afternoon, and evening, or into many meetings held over several days. In Congress, a session may comprise hundreds of almost daily meetings, sometimes continuing for nearly a year. Departure from parliamentary meetings and ordinary speech. Because of the fact that a meeting and a session usually coincide in ordinary local societies or branches, these two terms often tend to become confused or used interchangeably in everyday speech. Whenever either word is used, the context should be noted in the light of the explanations in this section. A similar situation exists regarding the terms recess, adjournment, and adjournment sine die. It is common, especially in conventions, to hear the word recess also applied to a longer break that does terminate a meeting and that consequently should be understood as an adjournment, as in to recess until tomorrow. On the other hand, assemblies sometimes adjourn or provide the program or agenda for an adjournment when only a short recess is intended. The use of the word recess to describe the interval between regular sessions of an organization or assembly, as in the summer recess of Congress, is a colloquialism that has no relationship to the parliamentary meaning of the term. Comparative effects of recess and adjournment within a session. The distinction between recess and adjournment may in some cases become so thin that it must be judged in the individual context. For example, according to the definitions given above, a break in the proceedings of a convention for lunch may be more in the nature of a recess or of an adjournment, depending on the time and the extent of dispersion of the members that is required for them to be served. From the viewpoint of the effect of a recess or an adjournment on the procedure the next time the assembly is called to order, the difference is that at the conclusion of recess there are never any opening proceedings, but business is always immediately resumed where it was left off, just as if there had been no recess. At the beginning of any meeting, after the first meeting in a session, on the other hand, the resumption of business at the point where it was left off may be, but is not necessarily, preceded by brief opening ceremonies and the reading of minutes. Normally, in a session lasting several days, the minutes are read at the beginning of the first meeting each day, and the beginning of a later meeting of the same day may be virtually indistinguishable from the conclusion of a recess. Note: if the assembly recesses rather than adjourns, that may preclude certain motions to suspend the rules, see renewal of the motion 25.6, and to reconsider and enter on the minutes, see 3747.6. How meetings to continue a session are scheduled. When a meeting adjourns without ending the session, this necessarily means that the time for another meeting to continue the same business or order of business has already been set, or that provision has been made for such a meeting to be held at the call of the chair. The time or provision for this next meeting of the session may have been established by one of the following methods, which are listed in order of frequency at occurrence. A, through a program adopted at the beginning of a convention. B, by the adoption of the present meaning of the motion, main or privilege, depending on when it was moved to fix the time to which to adjourn. Or C, by a specification in the motion to adjourn. If that motion was made as a main motion while no other question was pending. Ordinary practice in adjourning. In ordinary practice, a meeting is closed by adopting a motion simply to adjourn, or under certain conditions, the chair can declare the adjournment without a motion, as in 21:14-15. The society meets again at the time provided in its bylaws or other rules, or is already established by the adoption of an earlier motion. If it does not expect to convene until the next regular meeting, prescribed by rule or bylaw, the chair declares that the meeting is adjourned, and such adjournment closes the session. On the other hand, if any methods listed in the preceding paragraph, or on the other hand, if another meeting in the same session has been scheduled by any of the other methods listed in the preceding paragraph, the chair announces the time as he declares the adjournment, saying, for example, that the meeting is adjourned until 4 p.m. tomorrow. In the event of a fire, riot, or other extreme emergency, if the chair believes taking time for a vote in the adjournment would be dangerous to those present, he should declare the meeting adjourned, to a suitable time and place for an adjourned meeting if he is able, or to meet at the call of the chair. Significance of session. The principal significance of the session as a complete unit of an assembly's engagement in proceedings lies in the freedom of each new session, as contrasted with the limitations placed upon a session in progress by decisions it has made. Some of the consequences of this characteristic of the session are described in the following paragraphs. Freedom of each new session. As a general rule, one session cannot place a question beyond the reach of a majority at a later session except through the process of adopting a special rule of order or an amendment to the bylaws, either of which requires more than a majority vote. See immediately below. It is improper, for example, to postpone anything beyond the next regular session, which would be an attempt to prevent that session from considering the question. The principle stated The principle stated applies in qualified form to cases in which a majority rescinds or amends something adopted in an earlier session, or discharges a committee from further consideration of a question referred to at an earlier session, which a majority can do provided that previous notice was given. See 35.27 and 36.47 for the vote required for these actions without previous notice. Relation of a session's freedom to the rules of an organization. The application of the same principle to the case of standing rules, which is the terms understood in this book do not deal with parliamentary procedure, see Chapter 2, is as follows. Although a standing rule can be adopted by a majority vote at any session and continues in force until it is rescinded or amended, such a rule does not interfere materially with the freedom of a later session, since it can be suspended for the duration of any session, but not for longer, by a majority vote. Bylaws, on the other hand, and special rules of order, which do deal with parliamentary procedure, contain the provisions that are expected to have stability from session to session, and to represent the judgment of the whole society as distinguished from the members voting at any particular session. These rules therefore require both previous notice and a two-thirds vote for amendment, with the vote of a majority of the entire membership as an allowable alternative, and rules of order require a two-thirds vote for suspension, while bylaws normally cannot be suspended. See chapters 2 and 25. Relation of a session's freedom to the renewability of motions. The conditions under which a motion can be renewed, that is, can be introduced as if new after having previously been made and disposed of without adoption, are closely related to the freedom of each new session and to the distinction between a meeting and a session. As stated in Chapter 38 and in 8.4, the same or substantially the same question cannot be brought up a second time during the same session except by means of the parliamentary motions that bring question again before the assembly. At any later session, on the other hand, any motion that is still applicable can normally be renewed unless it has come over from the previous session by one of the 5 processes mentioned in 9.7 through 1, under regular meeting below, as not finally disposed of. See also Chapter 38, where the renewal of motions is fully discussed. Relation of a session's freedom to limitation on appointment as chairman pro tem. If the Assembly is to elect a chairman pro tem to hold office beyond the current session, in the event of illness or disability of both the regular presiding officer and his alternate, notice must be given at the preceding meeting or in the call of the meeting that elects him. One session cannot interfere with the freedom of each new session to choose its own chairman pro tem, except by an election held with previous notice. See 1044 through 50.